special legislative session this past summer left Oregonians with more questions than answers. And a big question is how to balance a budget which will be more than $1 billion short of continuing the programs approved by the legislature in 1991. Governor Barbara Roberts now faces one of the toughest jobs ever to confront a governor. She is required by law to propose a 1993-95 budget by December 1st. Confronting the reality of ballot measure 5 will require deep and painful budget cuts. Governor Roberts is with us today to discuss her strategy for the 1993-95 budget. A fourth-generation Oregonian, the governor is a person who thrives on challenge. She began her years of public service as an advocate for handicapped children, which led her to running for elective office. After serving in the Oregon Legislature in 1984, she was elected Secretary of State, the first Democrat to hold that office in 110 years. In January 1991, she was inaugurated as Oregon's first woman governor. Her leadership talents are certainly going to be put to the test during the coming months, and we are indeed pleased that she has come to the City Club to share her plans for these challenging times. Please join me in welcoming Governor Barbara Roberts.
Very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Ooh, that feels good. It's a lot more fun than a recall. Well, I'm impressed that the audience is so large today because I know that when you found out that I was coming to talk to the City Club about the state budget, you probably thought that you were in for a pretty grim session, another hour of doom and gloom with the governor of Oregon. And yes, it's true. Under Measure 5, no, that's not true. That might be right. It is true, obviously, under Measure 5 that our schools are going to suffer, that higher education programs will be dropped, that prison cells will close, and that many in serious need in Oregon will be unserved. And yet you've already heard much about these looming budget effects and about how the state will cut services by nearly 20% in the next two-year budgets. Your own standing committees have reported on the impact of Measure 5. And other City Club speakers in the past have discussed Measure 5 cuts and what they mean, including President Judith Ramaley from Portland State University, who discussed some of the cuts and what they would mean in higher ed's future and Portland State's future. City council candidates who have been before this audience worried about what those cuts will mean at the local level. And Portland School Superintendent Beerworth, who promised to pursue educational excellence despite serious budget constraints in his school district and in others. You understand that we will simply not be able to continue the same level of government and school services as Measure 5 phases in over the next 4 years. So I'm not here to present you with a litany of cuts or a list of services that Oregon will lose. No matter how hard the hand that's been dealt, every leader in Oregon faces the challenge of working to leave a legacy, a positive legacy, for our children. Every real leader in Oregon must take an imperfect world and try to make it better. And all governors, in their own ways and in their own times, have been called upon to meet challenges for Oregon. And past governors have met great challenges, rebuilding after the Vanport flood, confronting serious times of deep recession and unemployment, or rebuilding our prisons so that the crowding that was occurring where inmates slept in cots in the hallways could be ended. And like past governors, I refuse to accept the way things are, and instead will fight for the way things should be, laying a foundation for the future of our state. I want Oregon to be a place where our people are educated and where they're prepared for good jobs. I want an Oregon where our children are not giving birth to children, where our air is healthy and breathable, where people can shop in safety on a sunny Saturday afternoon in downtown Portland. I face serious challenges as governor, and every action I take, every bill I propose, and every budget I put together, I must push for a positive future for Oregon. Yet even before ballot measure 5, Oregon state government was facing some very, very tough challenges. Our future was already in jeopardy. The demands on state government have been growing dramatically, outpacing our efforts to solve the basic problems that underlie so many of the demands we feel. How can we ever cut our welfare rolls if our teens are pregnant and our schools leave many graduates unprepared for work? How can we hope that rural communities will prosper if we don't concentrate some of our investments in diversifying our statewide economy? And how can we quit recycling inmates through our prisons if we don't offer drug treatment and job skills programs on the inside of those prisons? How much money will be spent struggling with today's crises instead of preventing the problems tomorrow? Now, these questions raise some very difficult choices for Oregon. We simply can't afford to continue every good program in government because there will never be enough money to do it all. Not now, not ever. Our job is to make the right choices, and sometimes that means some very, very tough choices. Look back at 1989, when the legislature expanded prenatal care for poor women, but chose not to cover some Oregon transplant operations. The right choice, I believe, a very tough one. I believe we must have the courage to abandon old ways of thinking and even old programs and pursue a new government that looks ahead to fight for the future, not the past. That's why I have been making some difficult and sweeping budget decisions even without the increased pressure brought by ballot measure 5, but now those decisions are just that much more difficult. Measure 5 didn't create the need to set tough new standards for government spending, but it certainly did force the issue to a crisis level. And let me be clear with you, we simply don't have enough money to do what's right for Oregon. On December 1, as you just heard, I will present a budget to the legislature as ever governor before me has. But unlike past governors, I must present a budget that includes more than $1 billion in service cuts. $1 billion. Usually, the budget submitted by the governor is called the governor's recommended budget, but not this year. I do not recommend to anyone that we pursue the budget cuts that I, by law, must propose. Measure 5 has placed state government in a cramped box, one that limits our vision and restricts our options. And I will make the best choices I can within that box, and I will defend the choices I make to put that budget together, the values that I weighed, and the priorities I set. But I will never defend the budget as one that's right for Oregon. And I will not be boxed in. I do not intend to give up my hopes, and I do not intend to give up Oregon's future. So this year, I will present two governor's budgets. The first is the mandated budget, including the Measure 5 service cuts. And the second budget will be the one that I can and will recommend for Oregon's future. In my conversation with Oregon, I talked with more than 10,000 Oregonians about the services government provides and how we pay for them. And they told me that they cared about our schools and that they believe that quality government services are important to their future. My recommended budget will reflect their feelings. But those Oregonians also told me that they want to make sure that government spends their tax dollars wisely. So my recommended budget will include the efficiency measures that I have already announced: elimination of 4,000 state positions, cutting the number of state agencies, abolishing 77 boards and commissions, and cutting the level of administration and the number of management positions in state government. And this recommended budget will also include proposals developed by 2 outside task forces that I appointed to examine state and local government operations. These are proposals to restructure state government and to save millions of dollars in local government services such as road maintenance and mental health services. I will use my governor's recommended budget to demonstrate that Oregon needs to restructure much in its state government, and that we can and must do the job better, that we must work smarter, and that we must operate more efficiently. But I will also use this budget to argue that we must not cut the heart out of government services in Oregon, that Oregonians cannot afford to sacrifice their future on the altar of short-term and short-sighted budget cuts. My governor's recommended budget will contain 2 types of priorities. In one area of priorities, I will recommend restoring part of the critical services that fell outside of that cramped Measure 5 box. In the second priority area, I will support programs that anticipate our future and not try to patch up the past. State government, your state government, must have a long-term strategy for Oregon. We have made some beginnings, but little more. And even when we have chosen thoughtful, long-term solutions, they have been woefully underfunded, and then they had to compete for budget dollars against long-established programs and systems. For instance, the Head Start program is one of those programs for the future. By investing attention and money to prepare at-risk preschoolers to enter schools, it pays off in both how those children succeed in school and how they succeed in our society. Oregon now spends about $2 billion in state money for kindergarten through the 12th grade education, but we spend less than $16.5 million as compared to that $2 billion for Head Start. Out of that $16.5 million, $10 million of that came out of my budget recommendations in my first budget. Currently, 38% of eligible Oregon children are enrolled in state and federal Head Start. We must move to be sure that we meet our 100% goal. That is a program for the future. And the Oregon Jobs Program is an investment in the future, and we absolutely know it works. It gives parents on welfare the skills and the support to become self-sufficient permanently. But when welfare caseloads rise, the Jobs Program is usually the first to be cut back, as immediate demands take precedent over long-term benefits. Such programs deserve more support and need more support, not less. A long-term philosophy must pervade our budgets and our government. My budget will move strongly and decisively in that direction. But even when my recommended budget is done, I know that I will not make everyone happy. Every service that government now offers has a constituency. And if that service is cut in my mandated budget and it is not restored in my recommended budget, that constituency will be pounding on my door. But I can take the heat. I believe that government must be willing to change, and we must show more results and more successful outcomes. And I cannot base my budget on the politically expedient and do justice to Oregon's future. Now, on the other hand, I want you to know there will be critics who continue to say that I just didn't get the message, that I need to face reality, and that I should cut more than the billion even. And that whenever a politician talks about investment, they say, They really mean spending. There will always be those who say that government has not cut enough, and there will always be those who say that we cannot cut any service that government now offers. My challenge is to lead the way despite critics on either side. My recommended budget will include measures to streamline government and cut costs and to prepare Oregon for the future. It will not be a budget to protect old spending levels or old ways of doing government in Oregon. But let me be blunt. My recommended budget will require new tax revenues. It will require more money than we have under ballot measure 5. It will require tax restructuring. I brought forward a tax plan, the Oregon tax plan, earlier this summer, that would have provided a stable, fair, and adequate revenue system for Oregon's future. For almost a year, thousands of Oregonians worked with me as I developed the Oregon tax plan. That plan broadened the base that pays for government, and it brought a new fairness to Oregon's tax system. That Oregon tax plan is the standard against which I will judge any tax proposal that comes forward. Now, obviously, I was disappointed that the legislature failed to allow Oregonians to vote on that plan. But there is more than one route to tax restructuring, more than one way to build a fair and stable tax system for Oregon. And if the legislature develops a solution that is better than the Oregon tax plan, I will enthusiastically support it. Under President Kitzhaber's leadership, a newly formed committee is now working, reviewing state programs, examining priorities, and hoping to define the core services that Oregon needs. So as the legislative committee works and meets, I am preparing my budget. Agency proposals for 20% cuts are being built to come to my office. Choices are being made about the future of our services and the fate of our institutions and about the Oregon that we and our children are going to live in. The clock is ticking. My budget is due December 1. It's already been 2 months since a special session, and time is knocking at the door. My first term in office, this is my challenge: to fight the short-sightedness, the defeatism, and the anti-government pandering, and to rise above the times, to take an imperfect world and try to make it better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor. I'm sure we have lots of questions from the audience, but the first one goes to Joanne Allen. I would also like to just remind City Club members that this is a time for questions, not comments. So with that in mind, Joanne, with your first question.
Thank you, Patty. Governor, you've directed all government agencies to reduce their budget by 20%. Norma Paulus has defended her refusal to cut the budget for basic education by saying that she is accountable to the people of Oregon and not you. How do you respond to that?
Carefully. I wish I had brought with me an editorial that the Grand newspaper published and then was reprinted in several papers in the state that referred to that as political pandering and puffery. You cannot cut $1 billion and more out of state government without everybody carrying their share of the load. And as painful as it is, if education doesn't take some of its share, then additional portions of that share will come out of prisons and mental health and nursing home beds and everything else we do in Oregon. And I think it is unrealistic to believe that any portion of the state budget will not be affected. I will put together a budget that faces reality because I don't have a choice. Norma may put together a different budget, and you will see the difference between reality and her choice in that budget operation.
Good afternoon, Governor. How much freedom do you think Oregon has to create policies regarding such issues as education, welfare, and taxation when our policies are in conflict with adjacent states and or the federal government?
I think you are about to see some unusual things happen between states that could, I believe, have some very negative impacts. The situation, I believe, in its 59th or 60th day in California between the governor and the legislature makes our special session look easy. But what you're going to see down there, as California does what I believe it will do in the end to meet its budget loss, is that you will see programs shut down there prior to those that must be cut in Oregon. You will see an influx of population come in from California, thereby impacting further the demands on services in Oregon. The state of Washington also has a deficit which it will have to cut back on. You will see that effect. So across the borders of states all over this nation, you're going to see populations in need moving to try to get services as a country basically is diminished. I think the most difficult thing we as governors face, and we talk about it across state lines and across party lines, is that we at the state level are carrying more and more and more of the load with less and less of the ability to raise the funds. The revolution on taxation is occurring at the local level because people can affect it, and the federal government basically is in a sense scot-free if you don't count the deficit. And they continue to allow us and expect us to take the responsibility for these very serious problems with very restrictive guidelines, such as we've seen in health, and then not give us the tools to do the job. I think at some point in time we need to begin to clarify, and I hope that occurs in the next administration, that there needs to be some balance between the source of money, which is basically the federal government, and the source of responsibility, which is basically state and local government.
Thank you.
Gretchen Beener. I'm also on the Government Taxation Committee, and this is our other question.
This is a big committee.
It is our understanding that you have proposed to eliminate the vast majority of state boards and commissions. Ignoring for the moment the potential value of citizen involvement, what is the net effect of dissolving these boards when it appears that the majority are either revenue neutral or revenue generating?
Well, first of all, let me be clear, there is nothing revenue neutral. Just believe me. There are about 300 boards and commissions in Oregon now, and I am proposing the elimination of 77 of those. Every legislative session, we create about 20 new boards and commissions, 20. Some of these boards and commissions have been there since the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. There's duplicative boards, there's boards that have outlived their usefulness, there's boards that hardly meet. But each of those boards, no matter how they're funded, even without general funds, by fees or dues or whatever they might be, each of them has a budget, each of them has an executive director, each of those budgets has to go through the budget process for the governor and the budget process for the legislature. I have 2 staff people, almost 2.5 staff people who spend full-time filling those boards. I mean, it is a massive job. There, you know, it's not 300 boards, it's 300 boards times 6 people, 10 people, 12 people, 20 people, however many on the boards. And we look for geographic balance and all of those other things, partisan balance, philosophical balance. It is a very big job. I mean, if you looked at the size of my staff and looked at 2.5 people filling those boards, you'd know that these are not for free. But I think more than that is that if you're going to create new boards that have usefulness today, then you have to be willing to say some of the boards that had a purpose in the past have outlived that purpose. And we have to be honest enough to get rid of them. And some of those people have told me they're useless.
John Bartley, City Club member. It's interesting that you're trying the 2-budget approach, considering how poorly it worked in Florida. Now, you mentioned that you'd like to save local government dollars, yet when you submitted the original special session tax proposal, Frank McNamara of the Portland School Board couldn't get revenue projections out of Salem. The lack of the information out of your office seemed to play a major part in Portland School Board's lack of support for that measure. Now PSB intends to pay up to $50,000 a year on getting economic data independent of your administration. Why is
Could we
this
have your
needful?
question, please?
Why is it needful for Portland School Board to pay $50,000 to a private consultant to get data and get econometric models which were developed at ODOE, and the data is sitting at ODOE? Why doesn't ODOE release this data to Portland School Board?
As far as I know, there is no current available data that is not released upon request from the state government. Part of the difficulty we have right now is when you don't have a budget yet together, when you don't know how the legislature is going to deal with the funding formula for schools or local governments in some cases, you can't project what the outcome will be. What we did was project what the outcome of the tax changes would be on local governments, quite frankly not enough, and on schools. But we couldn't do it through a formula that is developed and reevaluated every legislative session until that formula itself was developed. So what we offered was a framework for taxation, not the detail of that framework once it is put into detail in the committees of the legislature. So I think, if the school board has chosen to spend that kind of money, obviously that is their policy choice. But there is not a lack of public availability of numbers that are in fact ready and available to people who choose to have them.
My name is Leslie Hildula, City Club member. I have a question about the 20% figure and why you're using that, because I imagine that different state agencies and different programs are run more efficiently than others. Some management staffs are leaner than others. So why the 20% across the board?
Well, it's not a 20% cut across the board. It is my request to agencies to bring to me a 20% budget from each of those agencies with a 20% cut in service costs. Then I have some flexibility as I put the budget together to work and take into consideration the efficiencies, the agencies that have moved forward to get rid of heavy administrative loads in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, the agencies that have different kind of funding mechanisms, how this affects federal funds. All of those things will be evaluated and laid side by side as I make a final budget. We're not actually cutting the budget 20%, but a 20% budget allows me from each agency the flexibility to work across agency lines to come to a total that makes sense. So one agency may end up doing that 20%, another agency may not. But I have to have some flexibility. And then we've asked them to please bring in addition some of the places they would add money back in and why. And we've asked them to match it to the Oregon benchmarks that says if there is a benchmark we have selected for Oregon's future and your agency does something directly affecting that, such as teen pregnancies, dropout rates in schools, whatever it might be, we will consider that as we put the final budget together. So it's a framework for beginning.
Bill Crane, City Club and Program Committee member. I think we're dealing with a pretty disastrous ballot measure, number 5, and we've got a new one, in my opinion, coming down the pike, measure 9. Last Tuesday in Eugene, you spoke to what was going to happen with that, your thoughts about it, and if you will pardon my joke, I wanted to be the straight man to hand you an opportunity to talk about it.
I probably should give him my return line, which is somebody said it was wonderful that you came out on 9. But this measure is not a joke. I told the audience in Eugene that this is a hateful, ugly, terrible measure. Thank you very much. This is a measure about breeding hatred. This is a measure about dividing people instead of bringing them together. And one of the things I tried to add to the arguments against Measure 9 when I was in Eugene, we know the civil rights and the human rights reasons to oppose 9, but I wanted people to understand there were also economic reasons for opposing this. We talked about what happened in Arizona on the Martin Luther King holiday. We talked about what happened when David Duke ran for office in Louisiana. But what we wanted people to understand was if they believe this measure will not affect our economy, they do not know what this measure is already doing. We have major conventions in Oregon that are considering canceling reservations to bring their major convention here, one worth $2.2 million to Portland area in Oregon. Other major people like the Library Association and the School Library Association ready to bring national conventions here, waiting to see how the measure comes out. One of our fastest growing and maybe possibly our fastest growing industry in the state right now is the film and video industry. We are making movies here. You can't see a car commercial on television for any vehicle of any kind manufactured any place in the world that the commercial wasn't shot here in Oregon. It's like a tourism guide of Oregon to see the car commercials. That industry, on the front of its major professional newspapers in Hollywood and California and Los Angeles, have all printed stories on Measure 9, and we have had directors and producers tell us, I will not be back for another movie if Measure 9 passes. I can't put together a crew, I can't put together a cast, and they won't want to be here. So if we think this is not a major deterrent to who Oregon is, not just in terms of our image, but in terms of economics, then we don't understand yet its impact. We need to make that clear, and we need to lay it beside the other thing, which I think is even worse, because of what it does to divide people, to hurt people, and to create violence and hatred in Oregon. It's unacceptable for Oregon, unacceptable.
Andy Sloop, member of City Club's Ballot Measure 7 Study Committee. If Measure 7 fails at the polls, what is your assessment of the legislature's ability or inclination to come up with a more complete solution to Oregon's financial needs?
Well, I believe that the legislature is capable of finding a solution. I've always believed that. I believe in the legislative process. But I think that in order to do that, the hardest thing for everybody in Oregon right now is to get past the denial. It is so easy to believe that it will be okay, that some magic pile of money will show up, that someone will save us. And I think one of the things I would tell you that probably is the wound that I take out of the special session and the understanding that I brought away when it was done was that I'd moved further down that road past denial than some other people who were having to make that choice. I'd worked with it every single day for a year and a half. I knew what was coming. And I think I was further down that path than some legislators were. As the budget gets together, the legislature will clearly see where we are going and find it unacceptable. And I believe at that point in time, they will be able to build a package. I will be happy to bring back a package and indicated that I would be happy to do that as part of my process of the two budgets. But I believe right now the legislature is laying the framework to move in that direction, and I believe they are capable of doing that. I think together, the governor, the legislature, and the people of Oregon, we are clearly capable of doing it together.
Dick Dougal, City Club member. Would you find it easier to govern? Would Oregon save money, and would Oregon have a more efficient state government if Oregon followed the Nebraska example of having a unicameral legislature instead of a two-house legislature?
No. I don't think that helps the problem. I think truly one of the advantages in having two houses is they tend to generally have different philosophical views, not even political views, but philosophical views. And in that, we probably get better legislation. Maybe a little harder to govern in some respects, but what it does, and I've always felt this way about the process, when one house is finished with a bill, they may have come at it with one philosophical bent. When the other house sees it, they may have a completely different view of where that bill fits into Oregon's system. And when they lay those two side by side, they tend to come out with more balanced legislation. So from a governor's standpoint, I'd much rather they bring me balanced legislation and I don't have to veto a bunch of things done by one house without that kind of balance. So I think our two houses is a healthy way to govern.
Stuart Gates, City Club member. Would you give us your opinion, Governor, on the general subject of sales tax?
Well, seems seems like I've done this, but I'd be happy to do it before. I think the fun thing for me to tell you, if there's anything fun about taxation, is that many years ago, and Don Clark sitting here in the front will remember this well, there used to be a committee in Oregon called the No Sales Tax League of Oregon. I was its treasurer. And you remember the famous buttons with the foot in the door? They have my address on them. My view then was that sales tax were always the most regressive taxes of all, and that they were not right for Oregon because they were regressive. One of the dangers of education is that you sometimes have to change your mind. I served 4 years on the Revenue Committee of the House, and what I believe I learned in that period was it's not the label, it's the design. It's the detail that builds in regressive or progressive kinds of taxation. And out of that, I changed my position and believed that you can design a progressive sales tax, that you can take out the regressivity by taking out the things people must have and not taxing them. Housing, utilities, medical care, food. If you take those out, you take out the things that most low and moderate income people spend a huge majority, if not all of their money on. Those kinds of protections are what gives that kind of progressivity to a well-designed Oregon sales tax. I believe that we can do that in Oregon. I believe it ought to be part of our tax structure. I know how hard it is because I've come from the position of opposing it, but I believe as time goes on, Oregonians are going to begin to understand that there is another very regressive kind of taxation. One of those is the property tax. It is a regressive tax, not based on ability to pay. So I think we need to get away from the labels and look at the design and the combination of taxes that we put together to decide whether the system is fair and balanced and equitable and right for Oregon. So I don't have any hesitation about telling Oregonians, I believe you can design a really high-quality Oregon sales tax. It's not that I support a sales tax, I support that kind of a sales tax.
Falder Colby, City Club member. Governor Roberts, when I look around the room, I see nicely dressed people, and on the way over here from the parking lot, I saw people lying on the ground sleeping, and passed a number of people who are not nearly so nicely dressed. And so my question is, how can we as Oregonians learn that some of us might need to pay a lot more so that people who have nothing can get something?
Part of what I wanted to say to you when I was giving my prepared remarks earlier, and I hope that I've made clear, is that that's one of the kinds of investments we're talking about. People are usually on the street because they have mental health problems, alcohol problems, drug problems, or no job skills, sometimes because they're abused. Every one of those problems has a solution, every one of them. And we know what some of those solutions are. We just haven't invested in them because they haven't been as high a priority as some other things we've invested in. I think our priorities may be out of whack. I think we need to examine how we spend money. That's why prevention dollars for prenatal care that allows a child to be born healthy and start out right. That's the reason the Head Start program for low-income children, to give them a chance to start out even with everyone else. That's the reason when we look at alcoholism as a character flaw rather than a disease, we make mistakes with our friends and family members and co-workers, and they end up on the street. We have got to stop treating the problem as what we deal with and deal with the prevention in the first place. That's where we have failed, and I believe it is correctable. We also have to understand, as we sit in this room and look at the lunch we've just eaten and look at the way we're dressed, that some of us don't give enough back. And we just need to admit it and do something about it. Thank you very much.
Ray Polani, a City Club member, Governor. I-5 to Salem and Eugene will have to be widened soon if we do not fund rail now. No new taxes, but better use of existing ones. What do you recommend?
Ray, I thought you were probably going to ask me a question besides something that wasn't transportation related. But he's right. And you know, that's another one of those priority areas. How did this country get so out of whack that it decided rail wasn't important to move people and product? I don't understand. We had a massive investment in rail all over the United States of America, and we started taking it away. We started taking it away, making sure that we could use more costly ways and more damaging ways to move people and product. There was a governor who used to live in Portland and got on the train every day at the train station and rode to Salem to the state capitol every day. Imagine if you could do that and take all the cars that are moving back and forth between Salem and Portland and move them that way. Ray is absolutely right. We should be talking to the federal government, and we in the state government should become more supportive of reestablishing rails as part of the reality of America. And I would like to believe if we ever get an energy policy in America again, the President and I keep fighting about this, and a transportation a policy that really reflects the reality of America, that we will be able to do that as a nation, not just on a state-by-state basis. We're moving people with great efficiency and effectiveness with light rail on a local level, and we will continue to broaden that, but we need to look at it on a broader basis, on a statewide basis, and on a national basis.
Governor, I was wondering what your position is on the split roll property tax.
You measure on the ballot, you mean? Okay, because I think you know that my tax plan included a split roll. My difficulty with the split roll, let me do it right. I always try not to do it right. I'm opposing the measure. I always do that first because I think you need to know, and I know I'm not being evasive. Difficult choice for me because it raises money for programs that we need desperately. My difficulty is it's one more Band-Aid. And I want so much for us not to do Band-Aid taxation in Oregon. That's the reason I tried to look at the system across all of the tax pieces we had when I put the Oregon tax plan together. I think if we do another Band-Aid in Oregon, we'll give ourselves temporary relief, we'll think the world is okay, and we'll move right on down that road to the next catastrophe, the next budget, the next initiative. I don't think it's the way to get the job done as much as I'd like to have the money in the budget.
Governor Roberts. Art Scabola, City Club member. In view of all the natural endowments that this state has that have caused tourism to increase so rapidly and meaningfully, I'd like to know, since you're so clear on the need that we have for revenue, what are we doing to look at tourism as carrying some of its fair share of the burden of the property owner today that's here and having to deal with these problems?
Well, actually, one of the things, besides creating jobs and creating an economic impact in Oregon, tourism is also, as you know, collecting some tax dollars. The hotel-motel tax we should not miss. A number of things that are having very positive economic impacts. There's no question that tourism has a cost. It doesn't come for free. You don't bring millions of people into a state and not have needs for facilities, roads, parks, restaurants, hotels, other things. It also impacts communities, restroom facilities when they use our local communities. All of those things are part of that. But the tourism industry has brought remarkable change in Oregon economically, and it is doing another thing that I don't think we really ever thought about when we started really pushing it. It's bringing people into Oregon for the first time, and they're coming back with their businesses. We have several small businesses out of California where people came here 2 years ago on a vacation because they saw the ads that the Goldschmidt administration ran down in California about visiting Oregon with a deer in the middle of the highway. Said this is a traffic jam in Oregon. And they came to Oregon, and some of those people came back with their medium and small businesses. So I think that every time people see Oregon, they know why we're here. They know why they want to be here, And I think they not only bring the tourism dollars and the tourism activities, but I think they're going to bring us more than that, and there's very strong indications that's already happening. And I think the film and video industry is another one of the indications that what brings tourists here also brings film and video crews here.
Bill Weber, member. Going back to the discussion on merging, eliminating boards and commissions, there's a related subject, and that's privatizing institutions. Would you care to comment further on that, on such things as illustrating two different types of privatizing? One would be contracting for prisons, operation of prisons. Another type of thing that has been discussed as privatizing is Oregon Health Sciences Center. Would you care to comment on those and how you would approach that and whose initiative it would take to move on those or other types of institutions you might consider or someone else privatizing?
Let me take the prison one because I think it's a very good example of something that's being tried in some places in the country. It initially appears to be less costly, but as time goes on, it tends not to be less costly. The facilities that are built to do this are usually privately built. They're a very inexpensive kind of facility. They start out looking as if they can house the problem and deal with the problem, but as more and more prisoners go into those facilities, they found in some areas with county jails in some states and state prisons in one state that they have not met the facility need of how the federal government requires conditions within those frameworks. The other thing they found is that they've begun to have problems with employees in terms of training, in terms of the danger that is part of the job of being a prison guard, for instance, or a corrections officer. Once that's done with people who are in a different kind of commitment level, nobody stays a prison guard very long for the money. It's not a fun job, it's a tough job, it's a threatening job, it's a risky job, and they start having trouble holding employees, and then the wages begin to go up, and then you find you haven't saved any money. And the final reason I would tell you though we talked about it, and actually I met with some people to talk about it on several occasions early in my administration, the other problem we have is massive liability. Massive liability. You have a prison riot in a privately run prison, the state is still responsible. And so I think it's that kind of issue that makes that one a more difficult one than some of the others. We have moved to privatize some smaller things right now. The Oregon State Fair, Oregon Public Broadcasting, some things where there is a good support mechanism for putting them out in the community, and they will do well there. There's some other bigger things that are much harder to do, and unfortunately people always want the stuff that looks easy, and is, and they don't want the stuff that looks hard. So the things that are most costly to do in Oregon are the things that nobody else really wants to do. We cannot find a large group of people wanting to deal with the issue of drug-addicted babies, for instance. It's not a long line. And so many of the most difficult things we do in government and most expensive, we can't seem to privatize. We now privatize a lot of work we do on highways, a lot of computer work we do, a lot of contracting for other things that we do in state government. And we will do more of that as we find effective ways to do it, but I think the prison one has proved to be much more costly rather than cost savings.
Barbara, it is said that wisdom comes more from, I'm Sid Lezak, City Club member. It's said that wisdom comes more from bad experiences than from good experiences. What have you learned from your experience with the legislature, and how does what you have learned affect your relationship with that body?
It's sort of like the rest of that thing, Sid, is that people tell you if you have a lot of very tough experiences in your life that it builds lots of character, and I feel like I'm very long on character right now. I tried to say after the special session that if there was anything I failed to understand was that I wasn't at the same place the legislature was. I think that was the hardest thing for me to understand. I thought we'd been so clear. I thought we all understood the train coming down the track. I thought we had arrived at the same point. We kept the legislature informed all the way through. Here's how we're doing on the conversation. Here's what we're getting back. Here's what the people are telling us. Here's how the process is going. And then it was a little like the little red hen story. When we were planting the wheat, no one was very interested. And when we were grinding it, there wasn't a lot of people standing in line to help. And when we made the bread, there was a little problem. But when it got time to slice it, we had a lot of interested parties. And I should... And I really failed to understand that we hadn't arrived at the same place at the same time. That was my failure. I think I would not make that mistake again. I did learn something from it. I think there's a difference in the level of interest at various stages of the building of the loaf of bread, and I should have understood that. And so I think more than anything else, I understood, because I believe in the legislative process, I thought that I was working with them, and it appeared different to those who were on the other side of my office door. So I will do a better job in the future of working with them. I respect the process, and I believe we can do positive things together.
Mary McWilliams, City Club member. Governor Roberts, what are the political prospects for approval of the Oregon Health Plan? Either, number one, under a Bush administration that delayed acting and then finally rejected it, or alternatively under a Clinton administration whose vice president candidate has come out against the Oregon plan and whose wife serves in the Children's Defense Fund that also opposes it.
Well, first of all, I think the vice president's position that I happen to disagree with, the vice presidential candidate's position that I happen to disagree with, will probably go where some of Bush's positions went when he was Ronald Reagan's vice presidential nominee. Presidents who get elected tend to sort of carry the weight on that issue. I think the Bush administration right now, from the evidence we have seen this week, is at least ready to look again with this. I think they realized they sort of jumped the gun in doing that rejection without giving us an opportunity to explain that there was nothing in the Oregon plan that in any way discriminated against those with disabilities. I think people got over anxious and jumped politically before they acted administratively. There is now evidence that there is a chance to pull this back together. The time frame is very difficult to do it right now, but I believe it can be done. Bill Clinton has been very clear that he thinks the Oregon tax plan is an innovative, important step, and that he thinks it needs to be laid in place and give Oregon a chance to demonstrate to the rest of the nation whether this creative mechanism will work, and if so, how, and in what way you might amend it if there were some problems. So I don't think there's any question which president would give us the guarantee of that plan. But I do believe that there has been some new movement on the part of the Bush administration, and we welcome that. The plan is too important to let it become a partisan issue.
I'm Gus Mattersdorf, member of the club. I'd like to go back to taxes. You've mentioned sales taxes and property taxes as being regressive in their simplest form. You have not discussed the income tax, which was established in Oregon in 1950 and at that time was very progressive, ranging from a rate of about 4% to 10%. It hasn't been changed materially since, except that by now everybody is in the 10% bracket and the income tax has become quite regressive as a result. Shouldn't that be fixed in the interests of equity?
Yes. I tried. Part of my package of the Oregon tax plan had a change in the tax structure, income tax structure. It was not a very big change, but it gave income tax relief to the lower income brackets. And the further you went up the bracket, the less relief you got up the income bracket. I would like it to have been more. We simply couldn't give more relief unless we did a higher sales tax, and I didn't think that was a positive. So I believe that there's some changes needed in the income tax structure that reflect the difference in the effect of an income tax, particularly at the lowest incomes. And Oregon's lowest income rate starts much higher than it does in many other states. So I think if we could get that rate, particularly in the bottom incomes, down, I think we could affect that in terms of regressivity, and I think that needs to be done.
Governor, thank you for those comments. I think following up on your talk about character, I think the saying goes, adversity builds character. And one person once told me, yes, and be careful because in adversity there's always a lot of characters around. But we certainly welcome your leadership, and you're certainly a character that we're looking forward to being around. Thank you very much.